So recently there's been some massive news in the world of hardware startups and VC funding. So we're seeing headlines like Skilled AI raising $1.4 billion for an AI brain that can control any robot for any task. And they essentially tripled their valuation to $14 billion in just 7 months. Or we've seen headlines like Whoop, who has just raised $575 million now at a $10 billion valuation for a fitness wearable that tracks your body's recovery data. Now, these kinds of hardware success stories are becoming increasingly common. I think hardware companies are becoming more attractive to VCs right now. Even more so than they have been in recent years. And I think this is for good reason. Personally, the moat around physical products is just really strong. It's really difficult to copy and paste supply chains, and hardware just tends to be a little bit more difficult to build, so there's lower competition. So the economics, I think, when they work from a VC standpoint, these businesses are just really attractive. But today I'm actually not going to be talking about these TechCrunch mega rounds. Instead, I wanted to shine a light on something that gets a lot less coverage. I wanted to talk about real financial success within the indie hardware and the indie builder communities. Now, there's a growing number of these small product companies, HaaS, which is hardware as a service businesses, and solo hardware founders who are just really starting scrappy. They often don't have any pitch deck, no or limited connections, and more often than not, no safety net. They're just really scaling on the back of real products that they're building and then selling to real paying customers long before any investors are getting on board. Now, these are exactly the kinds of builders that our platform over at Lightloop was built for. So if you are in the early stages of a hardware idea, Lightloop helps you go from a rough concept or even just a napkin sketch to a high quality product render, video, or 3D model within minutes using AI. You don't need any CAD experience. It's really the fastest way to visualize what you're building before you've ever spent a dollar on manufacturing. Now, this really helps you communicate your idea to customers, partners, or VCs before you ever have anything built. If you're interested, a link can be found in the description. Now, today, what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk to you about 3 different indie hardware companies, and I wanted to talk about their kind of growth strategies or growth playbooks. Now, I'm not going to tell you obviously which playbook is going to be right for you, but I wanted to show you that there are more paths available to you in terms of growth than you might think. Now, some of these founders launched through hackathons or social media. Others started with government grants. Others used Kickstarter. My goal with this tutorial is simple. By the end, I want you to have a clearer picture of what's actually possible and which model might actually make the most sense for what you're building. So let's jump in. So first up, we have a company called Omi. Now, Omi manufactures small AI wearables. So here you'll see a necklace. Here is a pair of sunglasses. And they even have a brain-computer interface kit for developers. Now, these devices do things like monitor your conversations, provide real-time feedback, and help you document your surroundings and build a detailed memory of the people and the interactions in your life. And the core insight here, which I think makes this interesting, is that for most of us, that the moment that we close our ChatGPT or Claude instance, the AI forgets that we exist. Now, we have these blackout periods when we're not in front of our computer, obviously. But because Omi has wearables that stay on your body, the AI is essentially always on. It never forgets you, and it's going to build context about your life continuously. Now, the founder, who had already built and exited a software company called We Love No Code, which was a freelancer marketplace that was acquired by TopTal. So what happened is that after the sale, he started attending hackathons, networking, and building small projects. And it was through that process that the idea for a consumer hardware company started to take shape. So what he did here is he started really small and really simple. It was just this wearable necklace that you see right here, which is priced at $89. And I think actually this was just a 3D printed device that then he soldered the first prototype together in a day. And what this device does is it just listens, it transcribes and summarizes your day. It's going to do things like create tasks for you and builds what they call a brain map of your life. Now, there's no complicated setup here. As you can see, there's not even a screen. You monitor everything through your phone. So in terms of hardware builds, the early version of this project was actually quite simple. They sold initially through social media and then through Kickstarter, growing organically like this just from day one. Now, since their launch, they've continued to expand. They also have things like smart glasses and a brain-computer interface dev kit advocate. They harness open source tech so users own their data, and that transparency helped them integrate into sensitive environments like hospitals and even live sales floors. Now, on the numbers, they've raised a modest 2 million seed round. They've also crossed 1.5 million in ARR, and they hit profitability. So their next milestone is 200,000 software users, which they project gets them to around $100,000 a month in reoccurring revenue and full self-sustainability. So what we have here is we have a small team, we have open source tech, and most importantly, we have real revenue. And I think this is one great example of what indie hardware done right looks like. Okay, so let's move on to the second company here. So this is going to be a story about a feisty Finnish startup that scrapped its way into becoming an $11 billion health tech giant. So back in 2013, 3 founders from Finland took a contrarian swing at wearables. Now, while most of the market was obsessed with things like wrist trackers and step counts, Oura focused on something harder to measure and arguably more important, which was sleep and recovery. Now, early on, the company was bootstrapped and supported in part by Finnish innovation funding. Then in 2015, Oura validated demand with a Kickstarter campaign that raised more than $650,000 from roughly 2,400 backers. Now, the first ring was a little bit clunky, but the data was really compelling. And then in 2017, SRI International independently bought 2 rings from Kickstarter and published research showing Oura was one of the most accurate consumer wearables for measuring sleep quality and sleep stages at the time. Now, that validation gave the company a massive credibility boost. Then Aura's second generation ring, launched in 2018, dramatically shrank the hardware and helped turn the product from an interesting gadget into a much more scalable consumer wearable. And then from there, the momentum snowballed. Oura added a $5.99 per month subscription model, expanded into enterprise and sports partnerships with organizations like NASCAR, US Soccer, and the US military, and built a business that now blends premium hardware with reoccurring software revenue. Now, the numbers here are absolutely wild. Oura generated roughly $1 billion in revenue in 2025, up from around $500 million in 2024, with around 80% coming from hardware and 20% coming from subscriptions. Now, where we are now in mid-2026, the company is approaching 5 million paying members. Revenue has grown more than 4-fold over the prior 2 fiscal years, and the CEO is now projecting a 2026 revenue somewhere in the $1.5 billion to $2 billion range. And then a bit earlier this year, back in May, Oura filed a draft S1 for a proposed IPO. The last private valuation was around $11 billion. So the lesson here, I think, is simple. It's a contrarian bet. It's years of patient iteration and one well-timed piece of third-party validation. And all of this together can completely change a hardware company's trajectory. Okay, so next up we have Teenage Engineering. Now, Teenage Engineering spent most of its first 15 years building like a company that had no interest in following the normal startup script. So they were funded in Stockholm in 2025, and the company spent its first years really just obsessing over its first breakout product, the OP1, a portable synthesizer that looked more like an industrial art project than music hardware. It was unveiled in 2010, released in 2011, and quickly became a cult object among producers, musicians, and creative obsessives. At roughly $849, it was an expensive hardware product, but people loved this and bought it anyway. So that was the pattern that this indie hardware company just used over and over again. So Teenage Engineering just kept making hardware that felt unmistakably like hardware from Teenage Engineering. So their products became kind of associated with this kind of weird, premium, and instantly kind of recognizable brand. Now, what makes this company unusual is not just their design taste, it's their operating model as well. So Teenage Engineering spent most of its history building without the standard venture-backed hypergrowth machine. So they would do things instead like rely primarily on product revenue and staying small while its influence spread far beyond music gear. Then in 2022, after years of proving that it could survive on its own terms, it did take outside funding from 776. So the lesson, I think, with Teenage Engineering is that if you build something distinct enough and you just stick with it for long enough, you often don't have to chase attention. That attention at one point will start coming towards you. So there you have it, 3 very different hardware companies and 3 very different growth and marketing playbooks. So if you're building a hardware company or thinking about it, I'd encourage you to go deep on at least one of these case studies, not to copy their playbook, of course, but to understand the principles underneath it. And remember, if you're in the early stages of your own product idea right now, still figuring out what the thing actually looks like, that's exactly where we over at Lightloop can come in. You can describe your concept in plain English, upload a sketch, and get a polished client-ready visual in minutes. No CAD experience needed. It's built for the messy, fast-moving, early phase of product design, which is honestly where most ideas either gain traction or die. Again, if you're interested, a link can be found in the description. Now, if you know other indie hardware companies doing interesting things that I didn't mention here, just drop them in the comments. Even if it's your own company, feel free to give it a shout out below, but just don't drop a link. Tell us about what your hardware company is and tell us more about how you're going about scaling it. And remember, if you found this useful, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. Thanks for stopping by today.